The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not a legal notice, not a certified envelope, just a plain white rectangle sitting between a grocery circular and a water bill. I almost missed it. The return address was from a tenant I hadn't spoken to in over a year, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Calloway who rented the duplex on Meridian Street. Her handwriting was careful and slanted slightly to the left, the way people wrote before keyboards made penmanship irrelevant. She was writing, she explained, to confirm the new wire instructions. Her bank had flagged the change in account number, and she wanted to be certain before she sent November's payment. She hoped everything was well with the property. She hoped everything was well with me. I read the letter twice standing at the mailbox. Then I read it a third time, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside my hand. I had not sent new wire instructions. I had been in the hospital 6 weeks earlier. A minor cardiac procedure, they called it elective, which I always found to be a strange word for something involving your heart. My brother had offered to handle things while I was recovering. He knew the properties, knew the tenants, had access to the filing cabinet where I kept the lease agreements. I'd trusted him with the key to my house and the combination to the lockbox. I'd trusted him the way you trust someone you've known for 61 years. I set Mrs. Calloway's letter down on the table and did not move for a long time. I want to be precise about what I did not do in that moment. I did not call my brother. I did not drive to Meridian Street. I did not contact a lawyer or file a police report or post anything on the internet or say a single word to anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought, with the particular clarity that comes to a man who has spent 4 decades in the construction business, about load-bearing walls, about which ones you can touch and which ones you absolutely cannot, not because they're fragile, but because they hold everything else up. If you want to bring a structure down safely, you don't hit it at random. You identify the critical points first. Then you work quietly, and you work in the right order. I called Mrs. Calloway the next morning and thanked her for her diligence. I told her there had been a clerical error and to please continue using the original account. She was relieved. She asked about my health. I told her I was doing much better than people expected. That was the first true thing I said in what would become a very long and careful process. My brother and I had inherited the properties from our father 12 years earlier. 2 duplexes and a single-family rental, 3 parcels spread across the east side of Dayton, Ohio, nothing glamorous, but steady. Our father had bought them one by one over 30 years, fixing them up himself on weekends when his back still allowed it. He used to say that land was the only honest investment because you could touch it, you could stand on it. Nobody could move it to another country while you slept. After he died, my brother and I agreed informally to manage them together. I handled the finances and repairs. My brother, who was 7 years younger and had more time since his early retirement, handled tenant communication and lease renewals. We had no formal partnership agreement. We had never needed one. He was my brother. I hired a real estate attorney named Patricia on a Thursday afternoon, telling my wife I was going to look at a used truck. I did not tell my wife what was happening. She had survived breast cancer the year before and was only 3 months past her final reconstruction surgery. I was not going to put this on her until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Patricia had short gray hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. She listened to my summary without interrupting, then asked me to tell her again from the beginning, more slowly. When I finished the second time, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. She asked me if I had checked the county recorder's office. I had not. She turned her monitor toward me. My brother had filed a quitclaim deed on all 3 properties 11 weeks earlier, 6 days before my hospital procedure. The deed transferred full ownership from both of our names into his name alone. Under the grantor line, where my signature should have appeared, there was a signature that was not mine. It was close. It was careful. But it was not mine. I had a particular scar on my right index finger from a table saw accident in 1987 that made my capital A slightly asymmetrical, always had. The signature on that deed had a perfect capital A. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said that whoever had done this had made a significant mistake in assuming that quitclaim deeds filed in Ohio don't get cross-checked against existing mortgage instruments within 90 days. She said there was more. She pulled up another record. My brother had taken out a home equity line of credit against the Meridian Street duplex 3 weeks after the deed transfer. The amount was $314,000. The lender was a small community bank called First Heritage, based out of Kettering. I remember the specific sensation of sitting in that chair and absorbing that number. Not rage, something quieter and colder. The feeling of a man who has just realized the exact dimensions of what was done to him. I asked Patricia what my options were. She said we could file for an emergency injunction to freeze the properties, which would be fast but loud. Or we could proceed methodically, build an airtight case, and move when we were ready. She said the second option was harder and slower, but it left my brother no time to move assets, obscure records, or construct a defense. I asked her how long the methodical approach would take. She said 4 to 6 months if everything went cleanly. I told her I'd waited my whole life to build things that would last. 4 months was nothing. We hired a forensic document examiner through Patricia's network, a retired FBI analyst named Dr. Whitfield, who worked out of a home office in Cincinnati and had testified in federal court 43 times. He compared the signature on the quitclaim deed to 14 authenticated samples of my handwriting, including 2 loan documents, a partnership agreement from 1998, and my father's will. His report was 31 pages. His conclusion was unambiguous. During those months, I had dinner with my brother 4 times. He asked about my recovery. I told him I was getting stronger every week. He helped me carry groceries to my car after Thanksgiving. He told a story about our father at the dinner table that made everyone laugh. And I laughed too, because the alternative was to show him something I was not yet ready to show him. There is a kind of discipline in that kind of silence that I can't fully explain to someone who hasn't needed it. You learn it, if you're lucky, not from a therapist or a self-help book, but from years of doing work that requires you to hold a measurement steady in your head while everything around you shifts. You learn that the feeling and the action do not have to happen at the same time. You can feel everything and still wait. In February, Patricia called me with news I had not anticipated. First Heritage Bank was in the process of quietly liquidating a portion of its non-performing loan portfolio. The HELOC my brother had taken out against Meridian Street was among them. He had made only 1 payment in 5 months, and the bank's risk committee had flagged it. Patricia had a contact at a regional asset management firm that occasionally purchased distressed notes from community banks. The firm had been approached about the First Heritage portfolio. The Meridian Street note was valued at $314,000. Because of the delinquency, the bank was willing to sell it at a significant discount to move it off their books before their quarterly audit. Patricia asked if I wanted to purchase it. I asked her what it would cost. She said $240,000. She said that if the court ultimately ruled the deed transfer fraudulent, which she believed it would, I would own the debt instrument on a property I was about to recover legal title to, which meant my brother would owe that debt to me personally. I was quiet for a moment. I told her to make the call. The purchase closed in March through a single-member LLC I had formed for the purpose. My brother had no way of knowing who had purchased the note. The asset management firm was the face of the transaction. There was nothing in any public filing that connected the new note holder to me. 2 weeks later, Patricia filed the civil complaint. My brother called me the evening of the day he was served. I watched his name appear on my phone screen and felt nothing in particular, just a clean, factual awareness that this was the moment the second phase was beginning. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times that night. In the morning, there were 2 text messages asking me to call him, saying there had been a misunderstanding, saying we could work this out as a family. I saved all of it. His attorney was a man named Garrett, who wore expensive suits and had the slightly impatient demeanor of someone who believed most problems could be solved by talking loudly enough. In his initial response filing, Garrett argued that the quitclaim deed represented a legitimate estate restructuring that had been verbally agreed upon between both brothers prior to the hospital procedure. He argued that my brother had simply formalized what we had always informally understood, that he would take over management of the properties as I aged and my health declined. He used the word declined 3 times in 4 paragraphs. Patricia filed Dr. Whitfield's report 2 days later. There is a particular silence that happens in a legal proceeding when one side presents something the other side was not expecting. Garrett requested a 60-day continuance to retain their own document examiner. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Sandra Merritt, who had been on the Montgomery County Common Pleas bench for 19 years, granted 30. The defense examiner's report came back inconclusive on 3 signature samples and consistent with forgery on the remaining 11. Garrett filed a motion to exclude Dr. Whitfield's testimony on the grounds of methodology. Judge Merritt denied it in 4 sentences. The hearing lasted 2 days. On the second afternoon, Garrett made what I believe was his final strategic argument that even if the signature was problematic, there was no evidence of malicious intent, that my brother had acted in what he genuinely believed was our mutual interest, and that the court should weigh the equities of the situation rather than treat a family matter with the harshness of criminal law. Judge Merritt listened to all of it without expression. Then she looked up from her notes and said, in the level tone of someone who has heard every version of every story and is no longer surprised by any of them, equity does not protect a party who presents a forged instrument to the county recorder. Intent becomes irrelevant the moment the pen leaves the paper. She ruled in my favor on all three properties. The deed transfer was void. The HELOC was fraudulent in its origination. All title reverted to joint ownership pending a formal partition action, which Patricia had already prepared. Garrett then raised the issue of the outstanding HELOC debt, $314,000, now several months further delinquent. Judge Merritt asked who currently held the note. Patricia stood and stated the name of the LLC. Garrett looked confused. He asked for the identity of the LLC's member. Patricia said my name. There was a pause in the courtroom that I will not forget. My brother turned in his seat and looked at me across the room with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not grief, but something more like the look of a man who has just understood the dimensions of a building he thought he knew and realized the measurements were nothing like what he believed. Judge Merritt said, with no particular inflection, the debt obligation remains valid and is now held by the co-owner of the collateral property. Counsel may address the mechanics of that arrangement in a separate proceeding. She closed her folder. Outside the courthouse, Patricia and I stood on the steps for a moment in the thin April light. She said I had been a very patient client. I told her my father used to say that the best time to fix something is before it falls down, and the second best time is after it already has, because then you know exactly what you're dealing with. She smiled at that and said she might steal it. The partition action was resolved 6 weeks later. My brother paid off the HELOC, paid it to me through the LLC, in a structured arrangement that Patricia and Garrett negotiated without either of us in the room. The properties returned to my sole name. The legal fees and the cost of the note purchase were recovered in full. What remained after everything was settled was a number that, on paper, represented 30 years of my father standing on a ladder on a Saturday morning, caulking a window frame that didn't need caulking yet, but would eventually, because he understood that things don't hold themselves together. My wife found out on the evening of the day the partition order was signed. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Mrs. Calloway's letter 9 months earlier, and I told her all of it. She listened the way she listens to hard things, with her hands folded and her eyes very still. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if I was okay. I told her I didn't entirely know yet. I told her I thought I might need some time to figure out what you do with a grief that doesn't look like grief from the outside. A loss that came wrapped in paperwork and legal findings, instead of a phone call in the middle of the night. She said that was a reasonable thing to need. She asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. There is a particular quality to the light on Meridian Street in early May, when the maple trees along the parkway are fully leafed out and the afternoon sun comes through at an angle that makes the old brick look almost amber. I drove out there on a Saturday, about 3 weeks after the partition order. I parked across the street and sat in the truck for a while. Mrs. Calloway was in her garden, pulling something up by the roots with the methodical patience of a woman who has done it every spring for 40 years. She didn't see me. I didn't get out. I thought about my father, who had bought that duplex in 1986 for $62,000 because he believed that land was honest. I thought about the afternoon he showed it to my brother and me before the closing, walking us through the empty rooms, pointing out the original hardwood under the carpet, the plaster walls that would outlast everything we could put up to replace them. My brother was 23 years old and kept asking about the return on investment. My father kept talking about the bones. I thought about all the years between then and now, the leases and the repairs, and the tenants who stayed for a decade, and the ones who left after 6 months, the roof we replaced in 2011, and the water heater we replaced twice, the slow accumulation of a thing that holds its value, not because the market says so, but because someone kept showing up to maintain it. I don't know exactly when the grief arrived. I only know that it was there, quiet and without drama, the way it always is when you lose something you built by hand. I started the truck and drove home. The last time I spoke to my brother was at our mother's birthday dinner in June. He was there with his wife and his 2 sons. He sat at the far end of the table and did not make eye contact with me for the first hour. Near the end of the evening, when everyone was moving toward the door and my mother was distributing leftover cake in foil packets, he stopped beside me for a moment. He said he was sorry. I looked at him for a few seconds. I thought about saying several different things. I thought about the nights I'd spent at my father's bedside in his final weeks, the way he used to hold my hand without speaking, as if the presence itself was sufficient. I thought about the letter from Mrs. Calloway sitting on my kitchen table in October, the plain white envelope between a grocery circular and a water bill. I told my brother I'd heard him. Then I took my foil packet of cake and walked outside to where my wife was waiting by the car. And the evening was warm, and the streetlights were just beginning to come on, and there was nothing else that needed to be said. I still drive by the property sometimes on Saturday mornings. I'm not sure why, exactly. They're just buildings. But my father used to say you have to look at a thing regularly to know when it's starting to need attention, not when it's already failing, but before. In the small signs that most people walk past without registering, a hairline crack in the mortar, a window that doesn't seat quite right in its frame, the way water pools near a foundation after a rain. Most people don't notice those things until it's too late. My father noticed them every time. He taught me to notice them too. I suppose that's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of it. Not the courthouse, not the documents, not the measured satisfaction of watching the pieces fall into exactly the places where I'd planned to put them. What I come back to is that Tuesday in October, standing at the mailbox with a letter from a retired school teacher who just wanted to make sure she was sending her rent to the right place. She noticed something that didn't look right, and she said so. Sometimes that's all it takes.